Thank you for having me on. I am currently a UX architect at Automation Anywhere, based in San Jose, California, in the heart of Silicon Valley. So I've had a fairly well-rounded exposure in practice of designing mostly software products and services.
Perfect. Thank you. Uday, I've been following your LinkedIn for quite some time now, and you're right about the fact that there is so much that we can learn from you. And I can literally, like, right now make a list of podcasts that we should be doing together.
Awesome. That's great.
So for this episode, let's focus on Playbook.
Okay.
I know you mentioned about Playbook in one of your articles, and it really caught my eye because at ServiceNow, we are taking interviews for various positions, and every designer gets that inevitable question, right? Can you send me a portfolio?
Yep.
Personally, I have grown through the ladder, through the design, and how my own style has developed. I feel a couple of images don't do justice to what we really bring to the table. And I'm sure you have written about Playbook on the same lines, and we would love to hear about what got you started on the Playbook, and what actually is it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a great question because I think lots of folks in the industry, and especially those who are, perhaps coming in with quite a bit of experience and starting to get into more senior leadership positions, maybe at the principal, architect, manager, director kind of levels, where it's less about what I call the tradecraft of the design practice, in which you are making a solution that is going to be shipped, coded and shipped, but more about the what I call persuasive arts, facilitation, persuasion, maybe a little bit of being a therapist and a philosopher, while working with cross-functional teams. And so this notion of a playbook came to my mind as I was, at this time, it was a couple of years ago, I was looking around for a position and I applied, and of course I got the request for a portfolio. And I started to, respond with, yeah, here's the link to my portfolio and so forth. But then I realized, I did hit send and everything, but then after I sent it, I thought, but the portfolio doesn't really do the full justice around presenting a total story of the kinds of situations, dilemmas, complexities, ambiguities that I've dealt with. And I would say that I like to specialize in, and I think that demonstrates my strengths, my capabilities as a design leader. And so I took some time to really reflect on this. And I remember specifically like this one weekend where I just sat down and thought through, okay, what is a portfolio versus this other thing? And I didn't come up with a name just yet. But what I realized is that a portfolio, which is fine, it's totally respectable and useful and valuable for someone maybe coming in at a junior or mid-level position. And so it is a demonstration of craft, particularly what I call trade craft, the craft of making artifacts and so forth. And yes, you make a series of artifacts, and some of them are disposable, and they all fit within a continuum, if you will, of trying to solve a specific problem, usually some kind of software design problem, right? A request has come in, and you're trying to satisfy that request. You're trying to solve it with this solution, or address it with that solution. However, the other thing that I was thinking about is it's less about solutionizing, and it's more about what I call, and I start to realize, it's plays. It's the different kinds of situations you've been in, how you address them, and this notion of like a coach in the NBA or basketball or football or whatever, they have a set of plays that they always refer back to and they always use to try to defeat the opponent and score points and so forth. Different strategies, right? And oftentimes you hire a coach because they bring a set of plays that they are known for. I always go back to Phil Jackson, legendary coach, Chicago Bulls and LA Lakers. He won numerous championships. He is known for a specific style of gameplay and strategies on the basketball court, the triangle offense and so forth. And so I started to think about, well, do I have a set of plays? And at the time I had been doing this for like, I guess over 15 years or so, a set of plays that I bring to the table, regardless of the company, regardless of the kind of, design problem I'm solving for. And that's when I started to realize, yes, there are a set of things, plays, themes, approaches, strategies, methods that I bring to the table because it's me and it's the way I approach things in my own way that may be unique from how someone else would tackle it. And so that was kind of the origin of this notion of a playbook.
Beautiful and relevant when you put it that way. I actually had a bunch of questions lined up to ask you, but I'm totally going to scratch that off, and I have a new set of questions. So, when you say plays, there's a saying that the fish cannot really see water, and I know, me included, it might be difficult for someone to identify what their plays are, right? So how does someone even begin to look back on themselves, maybe as a third person, and identify their patterns or their plays? How do you suggest anyone does that?
Yeah, great question. So it really comes back to a bit of introspection and reflecting upon a few things. One, what are those key moments of leadership where you really felt like you were exuding confidence, building trust and respect, and tackling complexity and ambiguity in a way that was not just, following somebody else's orders or recipes and formulas and stuff like that, but where you were trying out something new and different. So that's one area. So think about those moments of leadership. Great things to think about are maybe those workshops that you led. Maybe it was some kind of cross-functional collaboration, or that moment where there was tension amongst competing agendas, competing viewpoints, and you were able to achieve some kind of alignment. How did you do that? For me, I'll just throw this out there, one specific example. What I always like to do is think about assumptions, dependencies, and expectations. That's just kind of a trick or a play that's just in the back of my mind whenever I hear competing arguments and tensions and there's just no resolutions. Everyone just kind of at loggerheads with each other. And so I think back to, okay, well, what are our key assumptions about our users and the problems they're trying to solve? What are some critical dependencies, which may be organizational, it may be technical, there may be something in the business environment and so forth. And then expectations, both from our side as someone who's proposing this product or service, and the expectations of the users and other stakeholders, other members of that ecosystem. Often just that, and it sounds so simplistic, almost naive, but asking those basic questions can help recenter and refocus the conversation and maybe break some of the tensions. So that's one key thing. So think about those moments of leadership. Thinking broadly beyond that, think about, if you've been doing this for, let's say, over 10 years, 10, 12, 15 years, what are some of the key themes that permeate your work and career? Think about the kinds of stuff that you enjoy doing, that you find intellectually stimulating and challenging. And again, how did you deal with that? So for me, some key themes that I've noticed, sketching, right? So I will always, have a sketchbook or whiteboard marker and stuff like that. And I'm always just, sketching ideas. That's just very inherent to how I tackle situations. Just go to the whiteboard and start sketching. Or another one for me is velocity of learning. So that's just kind of my own phrasing, but are we increasing our rate of learning more about the problem space and the opportunities and the customers and so forth? Or are we simply shipping to ship? So think about, those kind of themes. What do you gravitate towards? And then kind of the last question, which is a little bit more existential, but I think it's all rooted in this. Why are you doing this in the first place? Why are you in this field? Whether you're a designer or researcher, prototype, whatever it is, why are you doing it? What is driving your passion and enables you to become your best possible self, and potentially an example for others to be inspired by? And that doesn't really lead to a play, but it leads you to a sense of conviction and maybe even a sense of your own personal philosophy, that guides you, as a professional and as a leader for others to be inspired by.
I actually love it. So I want to tie this back to a rather naive question, but for the benefit of listeners, I kind of wanted to lay it out clearly. So what is the difference between a portfolio and a blog? And when do you suggest a designer start each of these? Is there, like, when you are a newbie or a fresher, you just have a portfolio, and then when you are into leadership, you kind of make a playbook, but then also have a blog? So are there any distinct lines between these three?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So I see the three as kind of interconnected in a sense. In fact, I was just mentoring a junior designer. She was a recent kind of transplant from another field into UX. I think she just completed a UX boot camp and so forth. And, she was trying to demonstrate her repertoire, her expertise and so forth, as basic as it was, but still try to get her foot in the door. And I suggested, well, start writing a blog, because the nice thing about a blog is that you're trying to capture your thoughts. And the best way to clarify your own thinking and expose to others how you think is by writing, or typing. And so when I started my blog, Ghost in the Pixel, it's still there. And I did that. I think I started in 2007, 2008, something like that. It started for two reasons. One was I was in a UX agency, the first one I had ever joined. And I was just learning a tremendous amount from the leadership team there, particularly the principal owner of that agency, who had come from Adobe before. And so he had all these lessons about designing software with deep, design passion and integrity and attention to detail and all these kinds of things. And so I did the blog partly as a record of what I was learning daily, and just like making it public to everybody. Hey, this is what I'm learning. Hope you enjoy it. This is before social media, right? Before things became viral and so forth in that sense. But the other reason I kept the blog was also, or I started it, was to capture thoughts about basically design, I guess it's design thinking, but design philosophy, design strategy, and so forth, that I had just kind of rumbling about in the back of my mind. And I just wanted a place to capture them and see how people would react to them. That's all. So daily learnings of things I was in the moment, just want to capture that. And then just other stuff, just kind of in the back of my mind, I wanted a place to put that. And, it kind of took off on its own. And I guess I had a lot of readers and so forth. But a blog is a great way to capture your thinking and expose to others. The portfolio is a demonstration of your ability to solve problems, and is a portrayal of that by having a sequence of, frankly, pictures, images, artifacts, and so forth to tell that story. And it is meant to be a demonstration of your work, the kind of work that you do. And it's useful for hiring and so forth. The playbook is more of an evolution beyond that, as you become much more of a leader and you want to demonstrate how you tackle scenarios and situations. So I see them all three kind of interconnected, and perhaps they have kind of a life cycle over time.
Got it. So when we speak about the playbook, again, since both of us are designers, I'm going to add a little bit of jargon here. What
Sure.
would a typical information architecture look like? Because I know we talked about a bunch of topics,
Mm.
all of them equally important, equally relevant, but how are all these interconnected? So maybe when a potential hiring manager comes and takes a look at the playbook,
Hmm.
what is the journey that you want them to take?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is all still very much experimental in my mind, but not theoretical. And what I mean by that is I have constructed a playbook. So at my current job, where I'm at, Automation Anywhere, so UX architect, over a year ago, when I first applied for the position, there was a standard, request for a portfolio, and I mean, I sent some work samples, just my website, that's just kind of get the foot in the door kind of thing. But then, they said, come on site and do the portfolio presentation, 1 hour, right, with the whole team, and then we'll do one-on-one interviews, right, kind of the standard setup. And so I thought, well, this is my chance. I'm going to show a playbook. And so I remember distinctly walking into the room after everyone had, kind of filed in. We're sitting around this conference table, and it was a fairly cramped room, by the way. But anyway, so I just said, greetings, hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. Instead of a portfolio, I'm going to show you a playbook. And this is the playbook that I bring to the table as a design leader and that I would apply here if you were to hire me. So obviously everyone stood up and was like, wow, okay, this is obviously something different. So I think that's point one. When you say the word playbook, it has a different connotation than portfolio. I think that there's a bit of a Pavlovian response when we hear portfolio. Like, okay, someone's going to walk in, they're going to go through kind of the standard formulaic, here's the problem, here are the issues, here's what I did. And the expectation, and yeah, maybe I'm a little bit cynical and jaded about it now, but I think there is an expectation, did this person follow the procedures and the methodology of standard user-centered design, right? And there's this kind of mental checklist. Okay, yes, they talk to users. Yes, they captured the inputs. They, factored in the insights and whatever. Created some wireframes and tested the wire, et cetera. And you just want to see, did someone process that, right, and go through that in a very procedural kind of way. When you say playbook, it changes people's perceptions of what's going to happen. And now you got people kind of expectant and excited to see. So that's point one. For the playbook itself, what I did, in fact, I've got mine opened up right here on my second monitor. And so the way I kind of set it up is I have a slide about myself as a design leader and what that means. Being an evangelist, being a catalyst, being an advisor. I talk about my years of experience and where I've worked, just kind of touch upon that. But then I get into very broad strokes, the context I've worked in, like a centralized UX team, a team of one, a chief designer for a lab environment, etc. Then the kinds of problems I've tackled, and then the themes. So I mentioned sketching, systems thinking, and so forth. And then with that, go into basically how I demonstrated 3 specific kinds of plays. And so the 3 plays I've got here are velocity of learning. Okay, so how do I demonstrate velocity of learning? And what are some situations I've done that? The second is triangulating roles. So I'm a big believer that, there's this kind of triangulation that's happening, between being this, what I call it, you're the philosopher, the therapist, the interpreter, and that's born out of my own experience as I've observed it and lived it. It is also my philosophy of how you function as a designer, right? And then the third one is about what I call vectors of influence. So how do I influence vision, strategy, process, culture? And then I just go into a short story about each of those. And it's very specific. It's like, okay, at PayPal, here's how I demonstrate velocity of learning. At Adobe, here's how I did triangulation of roles. At Citrix, here's how I did vectors of influence. So it's grounded, it's practical, it's real, it's specific, but it's more about the story, it's more about the situation and how I handle them. And yeah, I've got images, I've got the artifacts and so forth, but the artifacts are meant to ground the conversation. And let's face it, everyone just wants to see something, right? And just kind of focus everyone's attention on it. But it's not about how I went from, artifact 1 to artifact 2 to artifact 3, and then finally shipped a solution. Because in some cases, we never shipped anything. But the end result was that there was much improved understanding of the problem space or the opportunity or the business strategy and so forth, which are beyond shipping a product, right? Okay, so I'll pause there. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It actually makes perfect sense. So on the same lines, another naive question. So a blog is something that someone would update regularly, maybe if not daily, maybe a couple of times a week,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
A portfolio is something that you update as and when you have a new project that you're proud of. How and why would someone update a playbook?
Yeah. So for that, it's interesting. I think because it's rooted in situations, and in those moments of leadership and facilitation and so forth, I wonder if the updating of the playbook, and this is more of a hypothetical because again, this is experimental, but maybe the updating happens. I could see this happening almost on a quarterly basis, right? I mean, if you think about it, as you go through your OKRs and personal growth goals and stuff like that, maybe this is when you do a kind of a self-assessment of, did you apply certain plays? Did you develop a new play that kind of worked out a certain way? And then constantly kind of revisit the utility and value of them. Because ideally, maybe the playbook, as it evolves over time, let's say over the next 5 years or 7 years or whatever, your playbook could be growing, but also it's kind of evolving in the sense that you've got better plays, and you're tackling different kinds of situations. So maybe 5 years from now, I've got a different set of plays because I'm operating at a different level or I'm tackling certain kinds of challenges. So yeah, I'll go with that. Maybe it's on a quarterly basis.
Yeah, it does make sense, because I think that's the point where we kind of sit down with our managers and chart our growth and goals and
Right, exactly.
get ready for yeah. This is great. Okay, so what would your maybe this can be with respect to the playbook or just in general. I mean, we are in a time where there are a lot of people who are either looking out for new opportunities or there are a lot of people who are forced to look out for new opportunities, and it's kind of just all of a sudden. It wasn't really planned. What would your advice be for kids who are just starting out? I know it must be so difficult and chaotic for them right now, and also experienced folks who thought that they had the stability, but they're just kind of, they find themselves in the middle of chaos right now. So what would your advice to both these groups be?
Yeah, we are going through some truly extraordinary, unprecedented times, extremely difficult times. So let me talk about each of them separately. So for newcomers who are just beginning in the field, and especially those who are kind of transplanting from another, domain like finance or accounting into UX and so forth, what I would suggest is, try to get into those habits of writing, blogging and so forth. Take on maybe some case study projects. They could be kind of, it's fine if they're kind of made up. I mean, if you're like doing like, I'm going to redesign Spotify or whatever, knowing that obviously there's a whole bunch of complexity that you have no idea what's going on at Spotify. I'm only picking on them because I use them and I know some people who work at Spotify. But anyway, so come up with those kind of sample projects for yourself, because that'll help you try to stay sharp in terms of just practicing design skills, right? The grammars and methods and so forth. the tradecraft, and try to kind of build out your portfolio based upon that. And as you pursue and, you're sending out resumes and so forth. By the way, when it comes to looking for a job, despite these are tough times, I would still highly recommend doing that kind of self-assessment about, now if you're just beginning, what it is you want to do, what are your passions, or at least curiosities and areas of exploration, to kind of develop your sense of who you are as a designer or researcher, so that you're not just kind of scattershot, just throwing resumes anywhere and everywhere and just seeing if somebody bites. That's not really an effective strategy. More effectively, at least know who you are and what you want to become, or some sense of that. Because more likely you want to be in a place where the management team, leadership team that you work with, they want to support you in your growth goals and help you become successful, right? Provide the resources and training and whatever. It is tough, I realize, if you need to find a job, because you got to put food on the table, you got to do what you got to do, right? On the opposite end of the spectrum, if you're much more experienced, maybe creating that kind of playbook and doing that kind of introspection and self-assessment, and recognizing, okay, here are some key themes, leadership opportunities or moments and situations where I have that unique value add, that can become, at least, I would think, kind of therapeutic, because then you're kind of like self-assessing, you're kind of going through that moment of realization, and maybe you realize the kind of opportunities that are really suited for you, and then try to pursue those with a sense of, conviction. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. It makes, it's actually perfect. And I am just holding myself back from asking you anything about self-assessment. I know it would be great if we could do another podcast on that, because that's a huge topic and that would benefit so many people out there, people who are looking and who are not currently. So I will hold off asking questions on that.
Sure.
But I wanted to touch base on what you mentioned earlier about your advice for someone who is just starting out to start writing a blog. I want to talk a bit about the imposter syndrome, and how comfortable are they putting themselves out where they themselves are learning and they're not really sure if they know what they're going to write. And how would you advise someone to deal with imposter syndrome?
Sure. The first step is knowing that everyone suffers that. Even I suffer imposter syndrome. It happens to everybody. It's just kind of part and parcel of the job, I guess. But the way to power through that is, realizing that everyone has been through this process before, in their own way. And by, if you're writing a blog and you're capturing your first kind of observations and inspirations and thoughts and so forth, you're doing it with a sense of, I guess, excitement and wonder and curiosity, right? And it's not about trying to come up with an original thought, or some fantastic new way of doing something. That's not the point. It's really about helping you clarify your own thinking, about the domain and the work that you do and the practices and so forth. And, who knows, maybe somebody will find it, and spark a conversation and have some discussions and so forth, whether it's on Twitter or social media or whatnot, or if you write a Medium post, right, get some conversations and commenting going there. It's more about your own learning and growth and development. So I think when you take that frame, hopefully that helps it become much more accessible and friendly, and not so daunting, not so intimidating, right?
Yes, definitely makes sense. That leads to my next question. The finding that somebody who will spark a conversation, right? Do you suggest that people go out and start looking for people, maybe tagging them, or let it just happen organically and just focus on learning right now?
I think it's more organic. Yeah, I was talking to a person a few weeks ago, newcomer to the field, and I suggested she start blogging and stuff like that. And one thing that came up is, you got to push those links out, right? Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and you may have to do it 3 times a week, right? Because of the way feeds work, and people scroll past things or they miss it or whatever, and do some of the hashtags and all that kind of stuff, so it becomes more discoverable. So there's a bit of effort towards pushing it out, and getting people to kind of engage and connect with it. So, but you got to kind of trust the process a little bit and trust the organic nature of it. At the end of the day, it's for your own
Yeah.
learning. So, yeah.
Yes. So put in the work, but do not solely depend on someone, quote unquote, finding you.
Yeah, exactly. Because the idea is that, hopefully you will have developed a, I'll say, body of work, which are your posts and your thoughts and so forth, which can then become a vehicle for maybe it's a job interview process or something else, right? And let's not forget about meetups and conferences and other kinds of activities, where newcomers can become actively involved. And in fact, actually, the ground has become equalized now that these conferences are virtual, right? Through Slack channels and so on and so forth. LinkedIn groups, Zoom chat, whatever. So hopefully that helps. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I have last 2 questions for you, Uday,
Okay.
and this is something that I ask all my guests. So speaking of network, I mean, we all know how important it is to find great mentors, great sponsors, and sometimes also just reach out to folks who wear in our shoes. So I guess, how do you find mentors? With an S, if there are any. Like, do you
Yeah.
actually have mentors at all? Where do you find them? And then the other end of the spectrum, what do you look for? What do you look for in a mentee? Like,
Mhm.
how do you decide to take them on?
Sure. Yeah. To your first question, yes, multiple mentors. And I think mentors, plural, happens over a career, right? And many mentors are often, maybe it's not an actual formal one-to-one mentoring relationship. The mentoring can happen in a much more kind of quiet kind of way, an ambient way, if you will, through, it could be managers, it could be just other senior designers, it could be authors of books that you're reading. I think in some sense, Tufte was a mentor. He doesn't know it. I read his books and I found his books very powerful and illuminating. John Maeda, in many ways, as I've found him to be a mentor. I did interact with him. We had conversations. But I think the learning aspect can happen in lots of different ways. Does not necessarily have to be a one-on-one formalized kind of construct. And then when it comes to a mentee, so if you are setting up like an actual formal structure, what I look for in a mentee, passion, curiosity, that spark of potential, and some kind of willingness or desire to want to self-improve. They want to grow and want to be challenged and so forth. But it's seeing that potential, which is hard to quantify. It's kind of elusive, right? It's comprised of all these things: curiosity, wonder, excitement. But also, I think it's seeing it. Yeah, it's that willingness to want to commit to doing and putting in that effort and so forth. Because your role as a mentor is to help kind of nurture and develop that over time. So the way I've put it, so I'm starting up a mentor-mentee relationship at work right now. We're actually structuring it a more formalized, like periodic check-ins and stuff like that. And the way I put it to him is, I expect him to bring the energy to those meetings and sync-ups. I mean, I'll be energetic too, but I need him to want this, right? And what I said to him also, quite candidly, is, look, if this is becoming kind of a drag, right? It becomes this kind of chore that he's like, oh, I've got that mentor meeting. Then maybe that's a signal we need to pause or stop, right? Because it shouldn't become that. It should be something that both sides are looking forward to.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that kind of brings us to the last part of the podcast. Are there any, again, a little bit of inside scoop. So, are there any instances in your career which have, or are there any moments in your career that have shaped you to help you there that you are today?
Oh, yes, several. I mean, it's interesting. So I'm thinking back across like almost 20 years worth of experience, right? And that's 20 years worth of arguments, embarrassments, screw ups, times that, yeah, I probably said the wrong thing or said it the wrong way. Lots of those kinds of moments. But, I think when I look back on some of the key moments, which are a little more optimistic, I think it was those moments where I had a champion, I had a supporter who helped me be successful, who would help kind of clear the path for me to be successful. And so I think about those situations, clear the path for me to be successful, but also clear the path so that I can make a mistake and take ownership for it and try to self-correct, right? And not be, I guess, directed a certain way. Right. So there's a sense of autonomy and empowerment for me to kind of do that myself. So I think those were those key moments. Certainly working under the tutelage of, or the mentorship of that UX agency, the owner who came from Adobe. I mean, that was a very strong, powerful influence on me. When I was at Citrix as a principal designer, which was a largely self-defined role. I was the only principal at that time, and then we hired a couple more. So I took on all kinds of roles and challenges, which got me a lot of executive face time. And that's when I learned lots of fun things, which is a whole other podcast. I think those are some of the most crucial moments. And then I think I mentioned being a team of one at a startup. That is truly one of the most powerful ways to learn. It is extremely stressful and overwhelming. Not sure if I'd recommend it to everybody. I know there's a lot of startups that are looking for designers, which is fantastic. They're a little bit misguided, I think, in that they think they can hire just one person. And oftentimes they hire someone who's really young and really recent, or fresh out of school or recently joined, because they're cheaper, right? They command a lower salary. But that person is no way equipped to handle the challenges of dealing with a startup. And being the team of one, doing literally everything. It's just overwhelming. But it's a fantastic way to learn, but it comes with a cost, and the cost can be burnout. So lots of different moments that have certainly influenced me to get to me, or help me become who I am today. So.
Well, thank you so much, Uday. I literally have this book where I have so many, forgive the color. My daughter kind of paints in my journal. So
Nice.
So there are two more podcasts that we would love to hear from you. One is the assessment that designers can take to find their zone, right? Which area they can be in. They can thrive and they can grow in. The second one is we wanted to hear more about what you learned from getting more face time with your executives and how designers can go about doing that.
Sure.
But to close this podcast on playbooks and what we have learned so far, is there any words of advice that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Sure. Just be very observant of the moments that you're in, the situations that you're tackling. Think about, how you are responding to those moments. What are you kind of instinctively reaching for in the back of your mind? Because chances are you have a certain set of plays. You just don't know it. Or they become kind of intuitive and kind of natural to you. And so, take a moment, observe, reflect, capture those. and chances are you probably already have a playbook. It's just a matter of actually making it concrete for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. I 100% believe that we already have a playbook. It's just in our heads right now.
Yep,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
we need to get it out. Are there any interesting books that you have been reading lately there?
Um, yeah, I got all kinds of books. I mean, more recently, I've been reading books around. So there's this book by, I'm just looking at it right now. It's on my bookshelf here. Maria Giudici, she wrote this book called The Rise of the DEO, the Design Executive Officer. And it does not necessarily have to be a designer, but the idea is that anybody can become an executive champion of design. So I find that one really fascinating and useful, even for someone who's new to the field. And there was this book I've been reading about planning by Peter Morville. I'm blanking on the title right now, but it's like planning and wayfinding and so forth. He's one of the original information architects himself and Lou Rosenfeld way back in the day. But it's a fascinating book, if only because he writes about it in a very storytelling fashion. And he also discusses planning as an art that is a creative art. And it's not just boring logistics, but it's actually a way to think about the future in multiple kinds of futures. Yeah, lots of stuff to read.
Absolutely. One thing that's common in all designers across the world is that we are constantly learning and learning.
Indeed, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Uday. Thank you for your time. And thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom with us. And I'm sure you have motivated a lot of us, including me, to start creating our playbooks. Thank you so much. So that was Uday Gajendar. You can reach out to him on LinkedIn. The link to his profile will be in the show notes below. So thank you.